So you probably remember Dad used to always kind of stand like this, and he'd put his arm under there and he'd grab his chin. And one day it was at Aunt Nellie's with Uncle Wayne and Uncle Glenn were there, and I looked over, and the three brothers were sitting there, and they're all standing exactly like this. So it must be genetic because I kind of do it sometimes too. But that's one memory I remember of Dad that I thought was interesting.
Hi. Okay, so a few memories I have of Grandpa is, well, one of them is when I think I was 7, I'm not sure though, but I had just gotten my tonsils out, and when I got my tonsils out, my parents had to go up and be Moz and Paws for Trek, so I was sent to go stay with Grandma and Grandpa, and I was not healing very well, and I would not drink anything, and I would not eat anything, and so then one day I just refused to drink any liquid whatsoever. And so Grandpa, all the cousins were coming over to go do the slip and slide. And Grandpa poured a glass of orange juice for me, set it on the table, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, "Kay, you're not allowed to go outside until this whole glass of orange juice is gone." And I remember I was so mad because not only was it orange juice that I had to drink, it had pulp in it, and pulp was really gross. But I found out and he kept doing that all the whole week. And when my mom and dad got home, I just cried because all of a sudden no one was yelling at me to drink liquid, and I was so happy. But I found out a few years later that if Grandpa hadn't done that, I would have had to go back to the hospital to get tubes because I was so dehydrated. So I'm grateful for Grandpa for looking out for me even when I didn't want him to. Um, and then another memory I have was, I think it was just this year in like January. And Grandma had some extra flowers left over from something. And I threw them together, and he got so excited because he loved it when I put together flowers. And it didn't matter what it looked like. It could have been half dead flowers falling over, and he would have thought it was amazing. Um, and it was so fun because he sat me down and he's like, "Okay, this is what you have to do. You have to get a bench. You have to tell your dad that you're taking over the garage, and you have to start a business because you should sell these." And he was super excited. It was so fun. So I think that and him calling me Alabeth were some of my favorite things about Grandpa. So yeah, there you go.
One of my memories that I have with Grandpa is when we would go to the North Field and he would pull us on the hay sled behind the tractor, and we would all jump on and off and on and off, and it was kind of fun.
Hi everybody, I'm here to share a memory of Grandpa. When I was little, well, my sister was little and my brother was little. We were all actually a lot littler than anybody is now. But anyway, Grandma and Grandpa would always come to our house, and whenever they would come, they would want to see our rooms and see if they were clean. And at Christmas time, we would set up all of our things we got from Santa and my parents, and we'd make a little display on our bed, and they would come to check and see how clean our room was and see all the things we got. So that was a memory that I have of Grandpa.
One of my favorite memories of Grandpa is going and branding the cows with everybody. And he always told me that Nurse Bree had to go and give all the vaccines. So I was always the one to shoot the cows.
My favorite memory of Grandpa was I was at a soccer game, and I was playing, and he was yelling at me from the sideline to go tackle him.
The memory I have of Grandpa Hicken was he would always call me Goat Girl whenever I saw him, which would make me laugh a lot and put a smile on my face. Another thing I also loved about him was whenever I was in a bad mood, he would call me Camille. But whenever I was in a good mood, he would call me Caitlin because he loved that name for me, and he loved to call me it.
My best memories with Grandpa were every summer when I would go up there and stay for a week when my parents would go on their anniversary trip, and he always made sure that I had something to do. He'd wake me up every morning, jumping on my bed until I went to bed the next night. He made sure I was always out outside doing something, doing some type of work, from being out in the field helping him with the fence or just sweeping off the rocks out in front of the house. He always made sure that I always had something to do and that I wouldn't waste my time.
Okay, Gabriel, tell us about Grandpa.
Toy. I was playing with him with my toys. I was trying to find toys, and I was trying to find Grandpa. He was playing with toys, and the end. I did all my.
So I've been asked to share one of my memories of Grandpa Hicken. And the memory I thought of was from years and years ago when I was still dating Allison. I came down to visit one weekend and I was able to go with John Robert and visit some people in town and go to a Rotary Club meeting with him. As I went there, I realized that he had been not only active in the community, but was really a living example of how we should treat each other and how we should be with those that we interact with, whether it be in church or in other situations, and that he was a man that was truly consistent and was always honest with who he was and what he did, and he wasn't afraid to share his testimony by living his testimony. And that's one of the things that's always stuck with me and I've tried to live up to.
My favorite memory of Grandpa was how whenever my dad and I went snowmobiling, on our way home we'd always call Grandpa and he'd talk to us about how we were okay and how the ride was, and we always talked to him after we would go snowmobiling, so that's just a good memory I have of him.
One of my first memories of John Robert was when I called Robert back on the phone. Robert had called me and left me his phone number to give him a call back. And when he gave me his number, he gave me his landline. It wasn't his cell phone, so it was the 0323 number that we all still know today. But John Robert answered the phone and Robert wasn't there, and he said, "Could I take a message?" And I said, "Yes, can you tell him that Jill called?" And he kind of was like, "Joe, Jill." I said, "Jill, like Jack and Jill?" He said, "Okay." So when he took my number, he said, "I'll let him know that you called," or something to the effect like, "Yeah, okay, whatever." And I said, "I just want you to know that I'm returning his phone call and that I'm just not calling him." And for some reason, I felt very much the impression that I needed to tell him that, and that I wasn't like chasing Robert, and that he didn't need to be afraid to give Robert the message. Like, "Oh, there's one of those girls, weirdos trying to call you." And I didn't want him to think that I was the forward one, I guess, because as you know, that's not the old school. And one other thing that I always think about when I think about Grandpa Hicken or John Robert is his hands. His hands, he had these little short Vienna sausage fingers. And I always would tease Robert, and I was like, "You have your dad's hands, you have these little short fat Vienna sausage fingers, and why are you making fun of me?" I'm like, "I'm not." But it's because my hands for a girl are so big that I think I noticed that were just probably smaller, but these fingers were wider. But the biggest difference was, they were strong and they did a lot. His hands definitely, for some reason, always pop up in my head for one reason or another, but it's because they did a lot. They taught a lot, they did a lot, they worked hard, and I think we all were blessed to be recipients of what he taught and what he knew. And so much of that came through working on the farm, working with the cows, just teaching. And the memory really is in those hands and how much they taught. And for some reason, they represent a lot to me. Like when I think about him, they come into my mind. And for example, I did this in front of the cows because that's something that makes me think of him too.
Okay, my favorite memory of Grandpa was when I was in middle school. My parents were on a cruise and I was staying with them. And it was Valentine's Day the next day, and I had to go to a Valentine's dance, but I didn't want to because I was scared of boys. But I was too scared to tell Grandpa. I don't know why. I thought he would make me go. So Aunt Becky came and we told Grandpa together as a team, and he just laughed and told me that it's probably a good idea because when he went to a dance, he had to dance with a girl who smelled really bad. So I was dodging a bullet.
Hi, I want to tell you a memory about Dad, and the theme is cars. So I was 15 and a half, and Dad was taking me for a ride in the car and to teach me how to drive. I didn't drive the truck, so I had to learn how to drive. And it was in the maroon car, and he took me, we started doing the 2 mile square, but we went past the 2 mile square up towards Lindsay's Hill. And he says, turn right here, and I said, right here? And he said, yes. So I turned right, put on the gas as hard as I can and the brake, and I did a 360 in the middle of the road on a dry road. And I came to a stop, and I jumped out of the car and ran over to the passenger side, and I told him I wasn't going to drive anymore. And he told me that I needed to get back on the horse, and I had to get back in the driver's seat and drive home. So I did. And then my second one is I was up in Logan. I was coming home for Christmas, and Uncle Jay had fixed my car. Something was wrong with it. And I got to Brigham City, and I called him because my car broke down, and I said, Dad, my car doesn't work, and he said that he would be right there to get me and to just sit in the car. And I don't think I realized it was an hour and a half away, but he jumped in the car and he came and picked me up and fixed my car and took me home. And I think that's pretty awesome that Dad he just knew that I needed him. And then the last one is probably in January. I told him that I taught my kids that they can only go 5 miles over the speed limit, and because that's what he taught me. And Dad laughed and he said, you know what, Allison, our car, when I told you that, the speed limit, the odometer was 5 miles slow. So I've been teaching, and maybe you guys have been teaching all the kids wrong, but anyway, love you, Dad.
I remember when Grandpa, we went to Dairy King, and I asked for a corn dog, and he's like, okay, 1 burrito.
The memory that I have that makes me kind of chuckle is when Grandma and Grandpa had gotten home from their mission, and my parents had come up to the homecoming to meet them, and we were all at the house waiting for them to come home. And as Grandpa threw open the front door, he had kind of trapped my parents behind the door, and then as he shut it, he just looked at them and said, well, who are you? And so they introduced themselves as my parents, and Grandpa said to my dad, well, then you can bless the food. Come on in. So it just makes me think about welcoming he always was, and that you were just an instant member of the family.
I remember last Christmas when Grandma and Grandpa came over for Christmas Eve, and they were looking at the Christmas tree, and my mom said to not touch the ornaments on the tree, and Grandpa leaned over to me and was like, if I was you, I'd come up and touch it in the middle of the night if I was you. And yeah.
One memory about Grandpa that I have is when he came to mow our lawn. When he came to mow our lawn in the summer, I'd run out and try to pick up all the hose and all the toys that were on the floor. And then he'd always just stop the lawnmower and be super interested in me. And and he had his hip, when he had surgery on his hip, he couldn't like walk or drive, and so I remember he drove his lawnmower up here, then he just started mowing my lawn.
I had a lot of experiences with Grandpa, and I thought that they were all pretty cool. Grandpa was a big influence on my life. The other day when we were at the piano recital, I remember feeling bad that he wasn't there, and I could tell that everyone felt like he was missing. And when Grandma was playing her song, I felt the spirit really strongly, and I started crying, and it made me know that Grandpa is still here with us, and I think that he touched me. But me and Grandpa worked a lot, and I learned a lot from him, and I know that he's gonna help me out a lot throughout my life. I'm forever grateful for him, and I know that everyone misses him, and I miss him a lot. But thankfully for the plan of salvation, we're able to be with him again.
What's your story about Grandpa?
Oh yeah, he teached me how to. Grandpa teached me. He teached me how to make a fire by my own.
He did? Did he help in the fireplace one time?
Well, he helped me hold the fire, the wood.
He did.
Then I put the fire, like I put the fire on where it fires when it warms up your back.
Yeah.
Then all about when we say goodbye when he died. This is all about when I know him.
Is that how you know him too, huh?
Yeah, I know him.
Now? Okay. My favorite memory of Grandpa is sitting with him in the tractor when we baled hay when we did that.
One of my memories of my grandpa is when at a Christmas party, my dad and him got like this matching shirt with like the shirt off and tattoos and the muscles and the candy cane in the pockets. And my dad got the whole gown, and then one Christmas morning they came to eat crepes with us, and he brought his shirt, and he had just been, and we had this picture of him just being like, and it was really funny. So that's one of a memory that I have of my grandpa.
A memory that I have with Grandpa Hicken is, as I was going to school in Idaho, he'd always call me once a week, and I'd always call him every now and then as well. But he was really good at staying in touch on how I was doing in life and how my grades were and what I was eating and if I was being fed well. And I just remember, oh, there's the clock that always plays, Grandpa's clock. Anyways, I just loved having those phone calls talking about jazz games and the cows and how his life is doing and him checking up on me, and that's a memory that I'll have forever about Grandpa.
Okay, so every year when I come to the studio to do the Christmas tree lights, John Robert would always show up when I was doing it, and then he started asking me how many lights I'd put on the tree, and I never really kept track, but since he started asking me, I started counting all the lights I put on the tree, and every year I'd report to him how many lights were on the tree this year. And this year I have 2,400 lights. So I hope John Robert knows that.
Okay, so one memory I have of Grandpa is that whenever my dad would come and put on our Christmas lights, Grandpa would always come up and make sure that my dad didn't fall off the roof. And my dad would always say, "Call Grandpa," and make it sound like you were stressed and I got really hurt. And then I'd say, "Grandpa, my dad fell off the roof." And I could tell he was just shaking his head, and he would always say, "That boy." I'll be up in 5 minutes. And then he would always come up and watch my dad put on the lights. And yeah, for some reason, I was always the one in the middle of the calls. I always had to call Grandpa for all the jokes. Because at that point, he didn't believe my dad anymore.
One thing I remember about Grandpa is how much he loved our kids. I remember he wanted to cut down the tree where the slip and slide ended because he was afraid the kids were gonna run into it, and Grandma did not want the tree cut down. And I remember him saying, "Grandma, we're not raising trees, we're raising grandkids." And that has always left such a big impression on me. I heard him say it several times as they were with the steers. He would say, "We're not raising steers, we're raising kids." And I just love how he never let a project or work to be done come in the way of the children being loved. And I just love that so much. I'm grateful for him and his example for that.
As I've thought about what I wanted to say about Grandpa, I've realized that most of my memories that I love and cherish about him came from when I was a little kid. After I graduated from high school and moved away, got married and all the things, I really only saw him like once or twice a year, which is super sad. But as I was growing up, he was such a constant figure in my life, and he was always there. Whenever I had an orchestra concert or a play or anything, he was there to support me and my family and the things that we did, and I love that about him. There's a few memories that I have of him, just small ones. Growing up, I remember that there was a Mexican restaurant in Provo called El Azteca, and it was one of my favorite restaurants. And sometimes Grandma and Grandpa would come down and we would go out to dinner together, which was super rare because we didn't ever really go out to dinner with Grandma and Grandpa because you don't go to restaurants, you make it at home, right? But we would go to this restaurant, and I remember at the end, he would always buy me a York peppermint patty. They had like a little bin that they put them in, and they sold them for like 25 cents, and he'd always buy me one. And to this day, whenever I eat one, I think of him because it was such a special little treat for me. Another memory that I have of him is back at the old house, because that's where most of my memories came from, because they didn't move to the new house till I was probably 16. But back at the old house in the family room with the fireplace and the green plaid couches, I remember many times I would be sitting on the couch and he would plop down and he'd lean forward and he'd say, "Oh, scratch where my wings are coming in." And it's little things like that make Grandpa for me in my mind. I have a lot of other little ones, but those are the few that I'll share with you. And we miss him lots.
Grandpa loved Christmas. I remember every Christmas morning he would get us up at 6 o'clock, and he just loved Christmas. I think he loved it as much as Johnny Elf, maybe.
Alrighty. One thing I would say, or a few things I would say, a couple memories I have about Grandpa is, remember one time, I vaguely remember this, but I remember it at the same time very clearly because I remember I was very, very young. Remember we were up in this, we've been up there snowmobiling before. We were up by that one cabin, there's this tiny spring, and I remember just being up there with Grandpa. I had no idea what we were doing, but I remember munching on some sandwiches and drinking out of that one spring. Super cool. I don't know why, that just came to my mind just barely. But another memory I have is definitely him coming in the mornings when we'd be at Grandma's house and screaming "Rise and shout, the Cougars are out." I still have nightmares, and it is very clear ringing in my head often. And also grateful for Grandpa for feeding the steers in the mornings that I did not feed the steers. He has a special place in heaven, especially for that reason. And one other thing that probably my greatest memory of him is the one night that he passed away. That was a very tender experience that I had with him. We won't go into much detail because I do not want my allergies to start acting up. But those are some good memories that I have of him. It's just so grateful that I know of the plan of salvation, to know that we'll be able to be with him again and enjoying some peppermints.
Okay, one of my memories of Dad or Grandpa was a few years ago. We were blowing out the sprinklers in Robert's old house, and there was a feral pheasant roaming the neighborhood that Nate Orton had let go, and the pheasant attacked Dad a couple times, and the video that you will see will show how he reacted to it.
He flew right into my face.
Yeah, he does.